The mining station on Kepler 442b had been silent for 3 days when Captain Sarah Chen received the distress beacon. The automated message was brief and chilling. Unknown hostiles, crew missing. Send help immediately. What made it worse was the final transmission from Station Commander Martinez just 2 hours later. They're not here to steal. They're here to hunt. Sarah's patrol ship, the Defiant, was the closest vessel to the remote mining operation, but even at maximum burn, it would take them 18 hours to reach Kepler 442b. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, the first thing they noticed was the complete absence of any mining vessels or transport ships. The second thing they noticed was that the station's outer lights were flickering in a pattern that definitely wasn't standard emergency protocol. "That's not random," Lieutenant Torres observed from the navigation station, pointing at the display showing the light pattern. "Someone's still alive down there, and they're trying to send us a message." Sarah studied the blinking pattern carefully. 3 long flashes, 3 short, 3 long. Then a pause. Then it repeated. SOS in Old Earth Morse code, she realized. But why use such an ancient system? The answer came when they tried to establish communication with the station. Every frequency was jammed with a strange, rhythmic clicking sound that seemed to pulse with intelligence. Whatever had taken the station wasn't just technologically advanced, it was actively preventing any form of electronic communication. "Captain," called Ensign Park from the sensor array, "I'm reading life signs on the station. 17 entities moving through the lower levels. But the biosignatures are unusual. They're not human, and they're not matching any known species in our database." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity had been exploring space for nearly 2 centuries now, and while they'd encountered dozens of alien species, most were either peaceful traders or had avoided human contact entirely. They'd never encountered anything that actively hunted humans for sport. "What about our people?" she asked. Park's face grew grim as he fine-tuned the sensors. "I'm detecting 1 human biosignature. Just 1. Male, elevated stress levels but alive. He's moving through the station's central hub, and it looks like he's being pursued." The mining station was a massive structure, built to house nearly 200 workers and their families. It was designed like a small city, with residential quarters, recreational areas, shopping districts, and the industrial sections where the actual mining operations took place. Finding one person in that maze would be nearly impossible, especially if hostile aliens were actively hunting him. "Sir," Torres spoke up again, "we're receiving a tight beam transmission. Audio only, very weak signal." Sarah nodded. "Put it through." The voice that crackled through the speakers was hoarse and exhausted, but unmistakably human. "This is Marcus Webb, Security Chief for Kepler Mining Station 7. If anyone's receiving this, stay away. Repeat, stay away. They've taken everyone else. They're not interested in prisoners or ransom. They hunt for pleasure, and they're very good at it." There was a pause, filled with the sound of heavy breathing and what sounded like distant clicking noises. Then Webb's voice continued. "I've been running for 2 days straight. They could have killed me a dozen times over, but they're playing with me, like cats with a mouse. They want the chase to last. I've got 30 rounds left in my weapon and 1 combat knife. When they finally decide to end this game, I'm going to make sure they remember why you don't hunt humans." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge of the Defiant in tense silence. Sarah looked around at her crew. The Defiant was a patrol vessel, not a military ship. They had minimal weapons and a crew of only 12. Going up against unknown alien predators in their own hunting ground was essentially a suicide mission. But there was a human being down there, alone and hunted, and the code of space exploration was clear. No human gets left behind. "Options," she said simply. "We could call for backup," suggested Torres. "The nearest military vessel is the Retribution. They could be here in 6 hours. Webb doesn't have 6 hours, Sarah replied. What else? The station's defensive systems, offered Park. If we could get aboard and reactivate them, we might be able to even the odds. Sarah shook her head. Those same systems would identify us as intruders. We'd be fighting the station's security and these alien hunters at the same time. She studied the schematics of the mining station on her display. The structure was built around a central hub with 6 main spokes extending outward like the points of a star. Each spoke contained different sections: residential, industrial, storage, life support, communications, and command. The aliens seemed to be moving through all sections randomly, which suggested they were either searching for something specific or simply enjoying the hunt. There, she said, pointing to a small docking port on the underside of the station. Emergency access point. It's designed for maintenance crews, so it won't trigger the main security systems. We can get a small team aboard without alerting anyone to our presence. Anyone including the hunters, Torres pointed out. That's the idea, Sarah said grimly. If they don't know we're there, we have the element of surprise. We find Webb, extract him, and get out before they realize what happened. She turned to address the full bridge crew. I'm not ordering anyone to come with me. This is volunteer only. These creatures have already killed nearly 200 people, and they seem to enjoy it. Anyone who comes aboard that station might not come back. The response was immediate. Every hand on the bridge went up. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her crew, but she knew she couldn't risk all of them. Torres, Park, and myself. Everyone else stays with the ship and keeps the engines warm. If we're not back in 4 hours, you jump to hyperspace and report this to Fleet Command. As they prepared to board the station, Sarah tried to piece together what they were facing. The aliens' behavior suggested they were intelligent hunters who viewed humans as prey animals. They were technologically advanced enough to jam all communications and apparently skilled enough to take down an entire station without triggering any automated distress calls until it was too late. But there was something else that bothered her. Webb had said they could have killed him multiple times but chose not to. That suggested they had rules to their hunt, some kind of code that governed how they pursued their prey. If she could figure out those rules, maybe she could use them to her advantage. The docking procedure was eerily smooth. The station's emergency port accepted their ship's docking clamps without any resistance, and the airlock cycled normally. As they stepped aboard the station, the first thing that hit them was the smell, a strange, musky odor that definitely wasn't human. They've been here for days, Torres whispered, covering his nose. This whole place reeks of them. The emergency access corridor was dimly lit and completely silent except for the hum of life support systems. Sarah checked her weapon, a standard plasma rifle with enough charge for about 40 shots. Torres and Park carried similar weapons, along with basic medical supplies and emergency rations. They moved carefully through the corridor, using hand signals to communicate. Sarah had studied the station schematics during the flight over, and she knew the emergency access would take them to a maintenance junction about halfway between the central hub and the residential sections. From there, they could access the main corridors and begin searching for Webb. But as they approached the junction, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze, the rhythmic clicking sound they'd detected on the communications channels. It was coming from somewhere ahead of them, and it was getting closer. She held up a hand, signaling the others to stop. The clicking continued for several more seconds, then faded as whatever was making it moved away. Sarah waited a full minute before signaling them to continue. The maintenance junction opened into a larger corridor that ran the length of the station's residential section. Emergency lighting cast everything in a reddish glow, and Sarah could see clear signs of a struggle. Scorch marks on the walls, overturned furniture, and dark stains on the floor that she preferred not to think about. "Which way?" Torres whispered. Sarah checked her scanner. Webb's biosignature was faint but detectable, somewhere in the central hub area. But between their current position and the hub lay nearly a kilometer of corridor, and they had no idea where the alien hunters might be waiting. "We stick to the maintenance passages," she decided. "Slower, but less chance of running into them." They had made it about halfway to the central hub when Park suddenly grabbed Sarah's arm. "Listen," he whispered. In the distance, they could hear the sound of running footsteps, human footsteps, moving fast and irregularly like someone who was exhausted but still trying to escape. The footsteps were accompanied by that rhythmic clicking, but the clicking seemed to be coming from multiple directions. "They're hurting him," Sarah realized, "driving him toward something." The footsteps grew closer, and Sarah made a quick decision. "Emergency supply closet? Now." She pointed to a small door marked with maintenance symbols. "We wait for them to pass, then we follow." They squeezed into the cramped supply closet just as the footsteps rounded the corner. Through a small window in the door, Sarah got her first look at Marcus Webb. He was a big man, probably in his 40s, with the kind of build that suggested he'd spent years doing physical labor. His security uniform was torn and stained with blood, though he seemed to be moving without any obvious injuries. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were still alert and focused. But it wasn't Webb that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It was what was pursuing him. The aliens were unlike anything she'd ever seen or imagined. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but moved with a fluid grace that suggested their bones and joints worked differently than human anatomy. Their skin appeared to be covered in some kind of natural armor that shifted color to match their surroundings, making them almost invisible in the dim emergency lighting. But what truly made them terrifying was their obvious intelligence. They weren't just chasing Webb randomly. They were coordinating their movements, using hand signals and that rhythmic clicking to communicate with each other. 3 of them were visible in the corridor, but Sarah could hear the clicking coming from at least 2 other directions. They were setting up a trap. Webb seemed to realize it too. As he reached a junction in the corridor, he suddenly stopped running and pressed himself against the wall. Sarah could see him checking his weapon, a military-grade plasma rifle that looked like it had seen heavy use in recent days. The lead alien hunter appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with that same fluid grace. It carried what looked like a weapon, though the design was completely foreign to human technology. The creature's head turned toward Webb's position, and Sarah realized it was wearing some kind of helmet or mask that covered most of its features. Webb raised his weapon and fired 3 quick shots. The plasma bolts lit up the corridor, but the alien moved with incredible speed, dodging 2 of the shots completely. The third caught it in what might have been its shoulder, causing it to stumble but not fall. Immediately, the clicking sounds from the other directions intensified, and Sarah knew the other hunters were closing in. Webb seemed to know it too, because he abandoned his position and started running again, but this time he was moving directly toward the supply closet where Sarah and her team were hiding. "Get ready," Sarah whispered to Torres and Park. "When I give the signal, we provide covering fire and get him to safety." But as Webb approached their position, Sarah realized they had a problem. The alien hunters weren't just pursuing him, they were anticipating his movements. 2 of them had somehow gotten ahead of him and were waiting in ambush positions further down the corridor. Webb was running straight into a trap, and he had no way of knowing it. Sarah made a split-second decision that would either save Webb's life or get them all killed. She threw open the supply closet door and stepped into the corridor with her weapon raised. "Webb, down!" Her shot took the nearest alien hunter completely by surprise, the plasma bolt catching its center mass and sending it sprawling. Torres and Park emerged from the closet with their weapons firing, and suddenly the carefully coordinated hunt turned into a chaotic firefight. Webb dove behind an overturned maintenance cart as plasma fire lit up the corridor from both directions. The alien hunters responded with their own weapons. strange devices that fired some kind of energy projectiles that left scorch marks wherever they hit. "This way!" Sarah shouted, pointing toward a maintenance hatch that would take them deeper into the station's infrastructure. "We need to get out of the open!" But as they fought their way toward the hatch, Sarah realized something that chilled her to the bone. The alien hunters weren't fighting to kill them, they were fighting to capture them. Their shots were precise enough to disable but not lethal, and they were clearly trying to herd the humans toward specific locations. They weren't just hunters, they were collectors. And now, instead of one human to hunt, they had 4. The maintenance tunnel was barely wide enough for 2 people, and the 4 humans had to crawl single file through the cramped space. Behind them, they could hear the rhythmic clicking of their pursuers, but the sound seemed to be getting more distant. "They're not following us in here," Webb gasped as they reached a wider junction. His face was covered in sweat, and Sarah could see that he was running on pure adrenaline and determination. "They know these tunnels lead to the central hub. They're probably setting up another ambush." Sarah checked her weapon's charge indicator. 26 shots remaining. Torres and Park weren't much better off. "How many of them are there?" she asked Webb. "I counted at least 12, maybe more," Webb replied, taking a moment to catch his breath. "They arrived 3 days ago in a ship that didn't show up on any of our sensors until it was already docking. By the time we realized they weren't friendly, they'd already taken control of the main communications array." "What happened to the others?" Torres asked quietly. Webb's expression darkened. "They didn't kill everyone at once. They took them in groups, always leaving enough people alive to keep the hunt interesting. I think I'm the last one because I've given them the best chase." They seemed to enjoy the challenge. Sarah studied the tunnel schematics on her scanner. The maintenance system connected every major section of the station, but it was also a maze. Without proper navigation, they could wander for days without finding an exit. But the aliens clearly knew the station layout as well as they did, which meant they were probably already positioning themselves at key exit points. "We need to change the rules of the game," Sarah said finally. "They expect us to run, to hide, to be prey. What if we became the hunters instead?" Webb stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Captain, with respect, these things are professional killers. They've been hunting for sport longer than humans have been in space. We're talking about creatures that took down 200 people without breaking a sweat. But they're not expecting us to fight back strategically," Sarah countered. "You said it yourself. They could have killed you anytime they wanted, but they chose to play games instead. That means they have rules, protocols they follow. If we can figure out those rules, we can use them against them." Park was studying his scanner readout. "I'm detecting some interesting energy signatures from their weapons," he reported. "They're not using plasma or particle beams like our technology. It looks more like some kind of bioelectric discharge." "Meaning what?" Torres asked. "Meaning their weapons might be organic in nature, living tools rather than manufactured ones. If that's true, they might have limitations we don't understand yet." Sarah felt the first glimmer of hope since they'd boarded the station. "What kind of limitations?" "Well, organic systems need energy sources, just like any living creature. If their weapons are actually part of their biology, they might have to rest or recharge between uses. That could explain why they haven't just overwhelmed us with massive firepower." Webb was nodding slowly. "Now that you mention it, I did notice they seemed to pace their attacks. Never more than 3 or 4 shots in rapid succession, then a pause. I thought they were just being careful with their ammunition." "Or their weapons need time to regenerate," Sarah said. "Which means if we can force them into a sustained firefight, we might be able to exhaust their ability to shoot back." Torres looked skeptical. "That's assuming we can survive long enough for that to happen." Sarah was already forming a plan. The station's central hub has multiple levels connected by maintenance shafts. If we can get there without being detected, we can set up in a defensive position with multiple escape routes, force them to come to us instead of letting them control the hunt. And how do we get there without being detected? Webb asked. They've probably got the whole area under surveillance. Sarah smiled grimly. We use their own tactics against them. They've been herding you through the station for days, right? Always pushing you toward specific areas, controlling where you go? Yeah, so? So they expect you to keep running in the same pattern. But what if you suddenly change direction? What if instead of running away from them, you ran toward their ship? Webb's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. You want to use me as bait. Not just bait, a diversion. While they're focused on chasing you toward their landing area, the rest of us can reach the central hub and set up our defensive position. Then we signal you to double back, and they'll be caught between us and you. It was a dangerous plan that required precise timing and a lot of luck. But it was better than crawling through maintenance tunnels until their weapons ran out of power or the aliens got tired of playing games. Webb checked his weapon again. I've got maybe 20 rounds left, plus this combat knife. It's not much, but I've made it last this long. You won't need much, Sarah assured him. Just enough to keep them interested while you lead them away from the hub. Can you access the external docking area from here? Webb consulted his own scanner. There's a service corridor that runs along the outer hull. It'll take me about 15 minutes to reach the docking bay where their ship is located. But once I'm there, I'll be trapped with nowhere else to run. You won't be trapped, Sarah said, because by then, we'll be in position to provide support. They synchronized their chronometers and reviewed the plan one more time. Webb would exit the maintenance tunnels near the residential section and make a lot of noise to attract the aliens' attention. Then he would lead them on a chase toward the outer docking area, taking a route that would keep them away from the central hub for at least 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Sarah, Torres, and Park would use the maintenance tunnels to reach the hub's lower level. From there, they could access the station's emergency armory and possibly even reactivate some of the defensive systems. One more thing, Webb said as they prepared to separate. These things are smart, but they're also arrogant. They've never encountered prey that fought back effectively. That might be our biggest advantage. They won't expect humans to be capable of tactical thinking under pressure. Sarah hoped he was right, because if this plan failed, they would all be dead within the hour. Webb crawled away through the maintenance tunnel, heading toward the residential section. Sarah waited exactly 3 minutes, then led Torres and Park in the opposite direction toward the central hub. The tunnels seemed to stretch on forever, and every few minutes they had to stop and listen for signs of pursuit. But the alien hunters had apparently taken Webb's bait. In the distance, they could hear the sound of weapons fire and that rhythmic clicking as the aliens communicated with each other. When they finally reached the access hatch to the hub's lower level, Sarah's chronometer showed that 11 minutes had passed since Webb started his diversion. They had 9 minutes to reach the armory and set up their defensive position before he would be forced to double back. The central hub was the most impressive part of the mining station. A massive cylindrical chamber that rose through 6 levels, with the main computer core at its center and various operational systems arranged around the perimeter. During normal operations, it would be bustling with technicians and administrators. Now it was silent except for the hum of life support systems. Sarah led her team quickly across the lower level toward the emergency armory. The heavy blast door was sealed, but her captain's access codes were still valid. Inside, they found exactly what they needed: military-grade weapons, ammunition, and personal armor designed for security teams. Torres, get the heavy plasma cannon set up covering the main entrance, Sarah ordered as she strapped on a suit of combat armor. Park, see if you can access the station's defensive systems from here. I want every automated gun, force field, and security barrier this place has. Torres hefted the massive weapon, a military cannon capable of firing sustained plasma bursts that could cut through hull armor. This ought to get their attention, he said with grim satisfaction. Park was already at a computer terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. I'm in the system, but most of the defensive protocols were disabled when the aliens first boarded. I can reactivate the barriers and automated guns, but it'll take a few minutes to bring them online. Sarah checked her chronometer. 6 minutes remaining. Do whatever you can. Even partial defenses will help even the odds. She was examining the armory's inventory when her communicator crackled with Webb's voice. They took the bait. All of them are following me toward the docking bay. But, Captain, there's something you need to know. I got a good look at their ship while I was running past it. What is it? It's not just a hunting vessel. It's a cargo ship. A big one. Large enough to hold hundreds of specimens. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. These aliens weren't just hunting for sport. They were collecting humans for some larger purpose. The mining station had been nothing more than a convenient hunting ground, a place to gather human specimens while enjoying the chase. How many more ships do they have? She asked. I don't know, but this one isn't alone. I can see at least 3 other vessels docked to the station's outer hull. Captain, I think we've stumbled into something much bigger than a simple hunting expedition. 4 minutes remaining. Sarah made a quick decision. Webb, change of plans. Don't double back to the hub. Head for your original position and try to access their ship's computer systems. We need to find out what we're really dealing with here. You want me to board an alien vessel by myself? You're the only one in position to do it. And if these things are part of a larger collection operation, we need to know how many more stations they've hit and whether there are other human survivors. There was a long pause before Webb responded. Roger that, Captain. But if this goes bad, make sure someone gets word to Fleet Command. Humanity needs to know what's out here. Torres had finished setting up the plasma cannon and was now arranging additional weapons around their defensive position. Park's work at the computer terminal was bearing fruit. Automated gun turrets were beginning to emerge from concealed positions around the hub, and energy barriers were starting to materialize across the main entrances. How long before the aliens realize Webb isn't coming back this way? Torres asked. Not long, Sarah replied. They're hunters, not fools. When they realize they've been led into a trap, they'll backtrack quickly. We need to be ready for them. As if summoned by her words, the rhythmic clicking sound suddenly echoed through the hub's upper levels. But this time it was different, faster, more urgent. The aliens had discovered Webb's deception and were returning in force. Here they come, Park said, abandoning the computer terminal to take up his weapon. Defensive systems are at about 60% capacity, but it's better than nothing. The first alien hunter appeared on the hub's 3rd level, moving with that same fluid grace, but now clearly agitated. It saw the human's defensive position immediately and let out a sound unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a piercing shriek that seemed to combine anger, frustration, and something that might have been admiration. I think we just earned their respect, Torres muttered, training the plasma cannon on the alien's position. But instead of attacking immediately, the alien hunter did something unexpected. It raised what looked like a communication device and began transmitting in a series of complex clicking patterns. Within seconds, similar devices were responding from multiple locations throughout the hub. They're calling for reinforcements, Sarah realized. All of them. This isn't just about hunting anymore. We've made it personal. The clicking stopped, and for a moment the hub was completely silent. Then, from every entrance simultaneously, the alien hunters began their assault. The battle that followed was like nothing in Sarah's military training. The aliens moved with coordinated precision, using their natural camouflage to appear and disappear almost at will. Their bioelectric weapons fired with deadly accuracy, but just as Park had predicted, they seemed to have limitations, never more than a few shots before a pause to recharge. The automated defenses helped even the odds. Energy barriers deflected many of the aliens' shots, while the gun turrets provided suppressing fire that forced the hunters to move carefully rather than charging directly at the human position. But there were too many of them, and they were learning the humans' tactics with frightening speed. What had started as a defensive battle was rapidly becoming a siege. "Captain," Torres called out as he fired another burst from the plasma cannon, "ammunition is running low. We can't keep this up much longer." Sarah was about to respond when her communicator crackled with Webb's voice. "Captain, I'm aboard their ship. You're not going to believe what I've found." Webb's voice crackled through the communicator as plasma fire continued to light up the central hub around Sarah and her team. "Captain, their ship's computer system is mostly biological, but I managed to access some kind of database. These hunters aren't just collecting humans randomly, they're working for someone else. Something called the Collective." Sarah ducked behind her barrier as another volley of bioelectric shots scorched the air above her head. "What kind of collective?" "Near as I can tell, it's a galaxy-spanning organization that catalogs and studies different species. But here's the thing. Humans aren't listed as just another species in their database. We're marked as something special. The file classification translates roughly to unusual adaptation potential." Torres fired another burst from the plasma cannon, forcing two alien hunters to retreat to higher ground. "Meaning what?" he shouted over the noise of the battle. "Meaning they think humans have some kind of evolutionary advantage that other species don't possess," Webb replied. "The database contains records of thousands of different species they've studied, but humans are the only ones marked for intensive behavioral analysis under extreme stress conditions." The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. The aliens hadn't been hunting for sport at all. They'd been conducting scientific experiments. Every human they'd killed or captured had been part of a larger study to understand what made humanity different from other species in the galaxy. "There's more," Webb continued. "I'm looking at star charts that show at least 40 other human colonies and stations that have been targeted for similar studies. Captain, this isn't just about our mining station. They're systematically studying every human settlement they can find." Park paused in his firing to look at Sarah with horror. 40 colonies? That's hundreds of thousands of people." "Not anymore." Webb's voice was grim. "According to their records, the studies are almost complete. They're preparing to submit their final report to this collective, and then—" His voice trailed off. "And then what?" Sarah demanded. "And then they recommend whether humans should be allowed to continue existing as an independent species or whether we should be managed like the other species they've studied." The alien hunters had temporarily pulled back to regroup, giving Sarah a moment to think. Around the hub, she could see them moving through the shadows, repositioning for what was clearly going to be a final assault. But now, she understood something crucial. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future of the entire human race. "Webb, can you access their communication systems? Send a message to their collective?" "Maybe. But why would you want to contact them? They're planning to decide whether humanity lives or dies." "Because," Sarah said as a desperate plan began to form in her mind, "they've been studying humans under stress conditions, but they've never encountered humans who refuse to be prey. They want to understand what makes us different. Let's show them." She turned to Torres and Park. "How much ammunition do we have left?" "Maybe enough for 5 more minutes of fighting," Torres replied. "Good. That should be enough." Sarah activated her communicator to reach Webb again. "I need you to patch me through to their communication system. I want to talk directly to whoever's in charge of this operation." "Captain, that's crazy. These things have been hunting us for days." "They're not going to stop for a conversation." "They will if I give them something they've never encountered before. A human who's willing to negotiate from a position of strength." It took Webb several minutes to figure out the alien communication system, during which the hunters continued their careful repositioning around the hub. When he finally managed to establish a connection, the voice that came through was unlike anything Sarah had expected. It was clearly artificial, probably translated through some kind of universal communication device. but it carried an unmistakable tone of curiosity and intelligence. Human, female. You wish to communicate. This is unexpected. I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and authoritative. I want to discuss the terms of our surrender. Torres stared at her like she'd lost her mind, but Sarah held up a hand to silence his protests. Surrender? The alien voice seemed genuinely surprised. Your species has never offered surrender in any of our previous studies. You always fight until death. That's because you've never given us a reason to surrender, Sarah replied. You've been studying us like laboratory animals, but you've never treated us like intelligent beings capable of negotiation. There was a long pause before the voice responded. You are correct. The collective's protocols require us to study species in their natural behavioral state. Interaction beyond hunting parameters has not been permitted. But you're curious, aren't you? Sarah pressed. Your database marks humans as having unusual adaptation potential. You want to understand what that means, but you can't learn it by hunting us. You can only learn it by talking to us. Another pause, this one even longer. Sarah could imagine the alien hunters conferring with each other, or possibly with their superiors in this mysterious collective. What do you propose, human female? A test. One human against one of your hunters. Hand-to-hand combat. No weapons except what we can make ourselves. If your hunter wins, we surrender unconditionally and submit to your studies. If the human wins, you report to your collective that humans are not suitable subjects for management and you leave our colonies alone. The response came much more quickly this time, and Sarah thought she could detect something like amusement in the translated voice. You would stake the future of your species on single combat? I would stake it on the principle that humanity has never been conquered by anyone, anywhere, at any time in our history. And we're not going to start now. Torres grabbed Sarah's arm. Captain, you can't be serious. You're talking about fighting one of these things with your bare hands. Sarah smiled grimly. Actually, I'm not talking about me fighting them. I'm talking about Webb. Before Torres could protest further, the alien voice returned. This proposal is intriguing. But why should we agree to such terms? We have you outnumbered and outgunned. Victory is already assured. Because victory without understanding teaches you nothing, Sarah replied. You've spent days studying how humans behave when they're hunted like animals, but you've never studied how humans behave when they're fighting for something bigger than their own survival. You want to understand what makes us different? Give us a chance to show you. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Then, suddenly, the alien hunters throughout the hub began to move. But instead of attacking, they were withdrawing to positions around the perimeter of the chamber. Your proposal is accepted, the voice announced. One of our most experienced hunters will face your champion in single combat. No weapons except what can be improvised from the immediate environment. Combat continues until one participant is unable to continue. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. The plan was working. But now everything depended on Webb's ability to defeat a creature that had been bred and trained for combat. Webb, she called into the communicator, did you hear all that? I heard it, Captain, and I accept. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Webb's laugh was dry but determined. Captain, I've been running from these things for 3 days. I'm tired of running. Besides, they said no weapons except what we can improvise, right? Well, I've been improvising ways to stay alive since this whole thing started. I think it's time to see just how good I've gotten at it. The central hub began to transform as both sides prepared for the combat. The alien hunters used some kind of technology to clear away debris and create a circular fighting area about 20 meters in diameter. Energy barriers went up around the perimeter to contain the combat, and Sarah realized this wasn't just a fight. It was a formal ritual with rules and protocols that probably dated back centuries. Webb appeared at one of the hub's entrances, and Sarah got her first good look at him since the rescue attempt began. He was exhausted and battered, but there was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Not desperation or fear, but a kind of focused determination that seemed almost predatory. The alien hunter that entered from the opposite side was clearly different from the others. Where the other hunters had moved with fluid grace, this one moved with obvious power and confidence. It was larger than the others, and its natural armor seemed thicker and more developed. This was clearly their champion, their most experienced killer. "The rules are simple," the translated voice announced. "Combat continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue. No weapons except what can be fashioned from materials within the combat area. No assistance from allies. Begin when ready." Webb looked around the fighting area, taking inventory of what was available. There were pieces of debris from the earlier battle, fragments of metal and plastic that could potentially be shaped into weapons. The alien hunter was doing the same thing, but it seemed less concerned with improvising tools than with studying its opponent. For almost a full minute, neither combatant moved. They circled each other slowly, each trying to understand the other's capabilities and intentions. The alien hunter was clearly the stronger and faster of the two, but Webb had something the hunter had probably never encountered before: 3 days of experience fighting these creatures and surviving. The alien made the first move, lunging forward with speed that was almost too fast to follow. But Webb had been expecting it. Instead of trying to dodge or block, he dropped and rolled, coming up behind the alien with a jagged piece of metal in his hand. His improvised weapon scraped across the alien's armor, drawing some kind of fluorescent green fluid that Sarah assumed was blood. The alien spun around with a sound that might have been surprise or pain, and for the first time since the combat began, it seemed to regard Webb as a serious threat rather than just prey. What followed was unlike any fight Sarah had ever witnessed. The alien hunter was clearly the superior physical specimen, stronger, faster, and equipped with natural weapons and armor that Webb couldn't match. But Webb fought with something the alien had never encountered before: the accumulated experience of every human who had ever had to fight for survival against impossible odds. He didn't try to match the alien's strength or speed. Instead, he used the fighting area itself as a weapon, staying close to debris and barriers that he could use for cover or as improvised weapons. When the alien's superior reach gave it an advantage, Webb closed the distance and fought at close range where its size became a disadvantage. But most importantly, Webb fought dirty. Humans, Sarah realized as she watched the combat, were probably the only species in the galaxy that had developed the concept of fighting dirty. Every other species the aliens had studied probably had some kind of natural code of combat, instinctive rules that governed how they fought. Humans had no such rules. Webb threw debris to distract his opponent, feinted attacks to one area while striking another, and used every psychological trick he'd learned during 3 days of being hunted. When the alien expected him to retreat, he attacked. When it expected him to attack, he used its momentum against it. The turning point came when the alien hunter, frustrated by Webb's unconventional tactics, made a mistake that any human warrior would have recognized instantly. It got angry. Anger, Sarah realized, was another uniquely human adaptation. Other species might feel fear, aggression, or territorial instincts, but the kind of cold, calculating anger that humans could maintain while still thinking clearly was apparently unknown to the aliens. The hunter's anger made it careless. It lunged for what it thought was a killing blow, but Webb had anticipated the move. He sidestepped at the last instant and brought his improvised weapon down on the joint where the alien's arm met its shoulder. The alien went down hard, green blood spreading across the floor of the combat area. It tried to rise, but the injury had damaged something crucial in its nervous system. After several attempts to stand, It finally lay still. The hub fell completely silent. Webb stood over his defeated opponent, breathing hard and bleeding from multiple wounds, but very much alive. Around the perimeter of the combat area, the other alien hunters stared at the scene with what Sarah could only interpret as shock. The translated voice, when it finally spoke, sounded different somehow, less confident, more uncertain. This outcome was not anticipated. Your champion has defeated our most experienced hunter through tactics that do not appear in any of our behavioral models. Webb looked up at the energy barriers surrounding the combat area. That's because you've been studying humans like we're just another species of animal, but we're not. We're the species that turned the entire planet into our hunting ground. We're the species that decided the rules of survival weren't good enough for us, so we made our own rules. He gestured toward the fallen alien hunter. Your fighter was faster, stronger, and better armed than me. But I won because I was willing to do whatever it took to survive, and I never stopped thinking about how to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The alien voice was quiet for a long moment before responding. The collective will need to review these findings. Our initial assessment of human adaptation potential was insufficient. Sarah stepped forward. What does that mean for our colonies, for our people? It means, the voice replied slowly, that humans will be reclassified, not as a species suitable for management, but as a species suitable for alliance. The collective has never encountered a species that combines individual survival instincts with collective strategic thinking in the manner you have demonstrated. The energy barriers around the combat area began to fade, and the alien hunters started moving toward the exits, but their leader paused before leaving. Captain Sarah Chen, your species has earned something that has never been granted before, recognition as an autonomous intelligence deserving of respect. This information will be transmitted to all collective vessels with instructions to avoid human territories unless invited. And the humans you've already captured? Sarah asked. Will be returned to their colonies with our apologies. The collective does not maintain specimens of allied species. As the aliens departed, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and pride that she suspected would stay with her for the rest of her life. Humanity had just passed its first test as a galactic species, not through superior technology or military might, but through the same stubborn refusal to give up that had carried them from caves to starships. Webb collapsed against a debris pile, finally allowing exhaustion to overtake him. Sarah knelt beside him to check his injuries. How did you know? She asked. How did you know you could beat something like that? Webb smiled wearily. Because I spent 3 days learning that they think like hunters, but they don't think like humans. They expected me to fight fair, to follow some kind of natural combat instincts. But humans don't have natural combat instincts. We have something better. What's that? We have the ability to decide that the rules don't apply to us. He gestured weakly toward where the alien hunters had disappeared. They were stronger, faster, and better armed. But they never learned the most important lesson about fighting humans. Which is? Webb's grin was fierce, despite his exhaustion. We don't fight fair, we don't give up, and we never, ever stop thinking of new ways to win. As Sarah helped Webb to his feet, her communicator crackled with a transmission from the Defiant. Her crew had been monitoring the entire encounter and were ready to beam them back aboard. But before they left the station, Sarah took one last look around the central hub. 40 human colonies had been studied and cataloged by these alien hunters. Hundreds of thousands of people had been treated as experimental subjects in a galaxy-spanning research project. But now, thanks to 30 rounds, 1 knife, and 1 human who refused to be prey, humanity had earned its place among the stars not as a subject species, but as an equal. The predators had learned to walk away because they'd finally encountered something they'd never expected, prey that hunted back.